All 5 team members regrouped inside the director's office. Socket had placed Ernest's code monkey inside his backpack as insurance for his continued cooperation. Once Axel had downloaded all of the files that Socket had decoded, she realized that there was no mention of the prototype they were looking for, but there was evidence that several files had been deleted.
Okay, Tin Man,
She said as she approached Ernest.
what do you know about a top-secret prototype that's being kept here? It's some kind of advanced communication device, right?
Ernest was confused at first. After all, they kept many prototypes locked up in the bowels of the building, but he guessed the woman was probably referring to the Omega Project. That was the last in a series of consciousness-altering technology research efforts the company had him working on. It was supposed to be beyond top secret. That's why they deleted all the project files. Obviously, it was not that top secret then, if someone had gone to the trouble and expense of hiring an extraction team to steal the device. He shifted uncomfortably in the seat they had put him in, his hands bound together with servo twine. The small intruder, he since learned was called Socket, threateningly jiggled the backpack holding his code monkey, and then narrowed his eyes at him.
Okay,
Ernest said.
I think I know what you're after and I can help you, yes.
Axel smiled.
But whoever hired you doesn't understand that the device has no real value.
Wrench gave him a dirty look and then snorted.
Sure, pal. Just tell us where this worthless device is, and we'll get out of here.
No, you don't understand. There's no practical use for it. All it does is break people.
Break people?
Crusher asked, genuinely curious.
Oh, yes. Everyone who has ever used it has gone quite mad.
Axel, unwilling to waste any more time, interjected.
Whatever, that's not our concern. We are just here to do a job, so lead the way, Tin Man.
She nudged Wrench, who then grabbed Ernest by the arm and pulled him up out of the chair.
My name is Professor Stevenson,
Ernest said indignantly. Wrench pushed him out of the office and into the corridor.
You heard the lady,
he said.
Take us to the prototype, Professor.
Reluctantly, Ernest led them to the hidden elevator at the end of the corridor. He intended to use the special code given to staff for situations just like this. The code would allow the elevator to operate, but would also send an alert to head office that their research base had been infiltrated. However, the big woman, the others referred to as Gears, had stopped him before he could enter the code, and she placed her hands on the access panel. They rapidly changed shape as she concentrated, and after a few seconds, a green light blinked on. The elevator rose to their floor, making low, churning noises, and then a few loud clanks as it settled. The elevator door slid open. Gears and the really big man had drawn firearms and were pointing them toward the elevator door just before it opened. They were being nervous for nothing, of course. There were no guards in the lower levels. Well, not human ones anyway. The group squeezed into the elevator, and Ernest was concerned that Newton may get crushed by one of the big people as they pushed up against Socket's back. Thankfully, they readjusted themselves, and he could see the outline of a tail, arched back and limbs that suggested the monkey was curled up and sleeping. There was a loud metal groan, then clanking noises as the elevator came to a halt and its door slid open to reveal the vast, high-ceilinged laboratory. Ernest felt himself being shoved forward, and he stumbled a little.
Where are the goddamn lights?
Wrench asked, while thumping the wall next to the elevator.
They are controlled by motion, you brute.
Ernest snapped, now feeling a little bit more annoyed at the situation he was in, rather than just scared. With that, a bank of overhead lights flicked on in sequence, leading from the elevator and deep into the heart of the vast basement level. Axel led the way, through the maze of partitioned work bays and scientific equipment. Crusher scanned each area ahead of them, and Socket monitored the comms to make sure no security protocols had been triggered. Wrench and Gears followed behind, keeping Ernest at arm's length in front of them. Through protests and feigned confusion, he was in fact leading them to the vault at the far side of the laboratory.
Really, you must listen to me. This device you're after is very dangerous.
He tried to warn them. Despite being told to be quiet, he repeated the warnings right up until they were standing in front of the huge vault door.
Okay, Professor.
Axel said.
How do we get this open?
You can't.
Ernest replied, obviously lying. Axel looked annoyed.
Look, we're getting in here with your help or without it, and I'd prefer your help to avoid setting off any defensive measures that may be installed. Do you want something terrible to happen to your little friend?
Socket had taken his backpack off and was holding it in front of Ernest with one fist, and his pistol pointing at it with his other hand. He had that same threatening look from earlier. Ernest took a few steps towards the door.
Look,
He said,
I don't ever go in the vault, but I do know it has state-of-the-art security, up to and including lethal measures.
He turned to look Axel straight in her eyes.
The director is the only one who ever goes in, and all I know is things he's let slip in conversation. I know there are automaton guards in there and several self-guiding defensive weapons, plasma guns and electro-stun emitters, that kind of thing.
Crusher was tapping all around the door, trying to find an access panel. Gears and Wrench had looked on the walls, but they couldn't find anything either. Socket had put his backpack on again and was sat on the floor. He was busy going through the building schematics trying to find a way in.
We don't have time for this.
Crusher said, looking at Axel.
I know.
She said.
Let me think.
Gears had stopped examining the walls and held up her hands.
I can't break a damn lock I can't find.
She said. Socket jumped to his feet.
I think I've got it.
He exclaimed.
Wrench, activate your jackhammer tech and focus your efforts right here.
He said, as he was pointing to a panel on the floor. Wrench lumbered over and placed both his fists directly above it. He squatted down to the point that both sets of his knuckles were contacting the floor. He told everyone to take a step back as a huge surge of energy rushed up his spine, through his shoulders and down his arms. Wrench was hitting the floor panel with such force, it felt like the whole building was shaking. The noise was deafening, but after only a few seconds, the panel gave way and he powered down. Crusher looked into the newly created hole and saw a large cable running from the direction of the vault door back toward the elevator.
Look,
Said Socket.
this is the main power conduit for the vault.
Cutting the power won't open the door.
Axel said, crouching down to get a better look.
We don't cut the power,
Socket said with a smile on his face.
we boost it.
Gears pointed at the vault door as Socket's plan dawned on her.
And then we can trace the excess electrical current. That will show us where the door controls are. Sock, you are a genius.
She said. Ernest spent the next few minutes sat watching his captors doing whatever it was they were doing, wishing that he hadn't decided to work late that night. Wondering if there was any way he could convince them to desist. Probably not. In light of that understanding, his main focus was the safety of his code monkey and himself, of course. Once the group of intruders had finished messing about with the power cable in the hole they'd created, they were high-fiving and praising each other. Such fools, he thought. The really large woman had located the vault door lock and was in it up to her elbows for a minute or more, until he could hear the door release mechanisms come alive. As the door began to rise up, he felt a familiar, strong grip pulling him to his feet.
Come on, Professor, we're going in.
Wrench said. Unlike the open nature of the laboratory section, the vault was a myriad network of small corridors with low ceilings. Wrench and Gears barely fit and had to stoop slightly as they walked. Crusher led the group using his eyes to scan ahead. Socket walked beside him, giving him information on the route to take, based on the building blueprints he had accessed. Axel and Ernest followed close behind, with Gears behind them, with her weapon drawn. Ernest followed her with Wrench at the rear, shunting him forward if he walked too slow for his liking. Crusher and Axel had their pistols out too. The sense of danger in the air was palpable.
Wait!
Socket shouted, grabbing Crusher's arm and stopping so quickly Ernest walked into the back of him. Ernest could see the outline of Newton squirming against the sides of Socket's backpack and desperately wanted to release him. He used the sudden cease of forward motion as an excuse to kick the little vandal in the back of his thighs. Socket didn't react. Instead, he motioned for everyone to crouch down, and everyone complied.
Listen up. From what I can tell, the left passage leads down to the area with the thickest walls, and it looks like several maximum security storage areas are built there. Around the left corner there are turrets in the ceiling, likely motion activated.
Socket explained.
So how are we gonna get past those guns?
Wrench asked, while scratching the side of his head with the barrel of his shotgun. Socket didn't respond, but instead looked to Axel and asked,
What do you think, boss?
Axel wiped the sweat off her brow with the back of her arm, and her eyes glazed over in bright, blue light while she was thinking. When her regular eyes returned, she looked up at the ceiling and pointed to the ventilation system access panel above them.
Sock, this defense system looks very similar to the one we dealt with on the Proxima 9 job, right? Do you think you could squeeze through the ventilation tubes?
She asked. Socket squinted as he studied the panel, then tapped on his right temple to bring up the layout of the ventilation system.
Yeah, that's doable.
I need you to use the air vents to get to the local control conduits for each turret. We're gonna have to knock out the targeting system for them.
Axel said.
That won't work.
Crusher objected.
There's 2 turrets for a reason. If anyone gets close enough to tamper with one of them, the other will respond and eliminate the threat.
That's right.
Socket agreed.
I can't do this alone. I'll need someone to disable the targeting on one turret while I take care of the other, and we'll have to do it simultaneously.
Axel looked perplexed.
But there's nobody else small enough to get through the vents,
She said.
That's not going to be a problem.
Crusher said, already stripping down to his underwear. Ernest overheard the conversation and peered over one of Gear's huge arms just in time to see Crusher's body writhing and reshaping itself. If the professor's eyes could widen, then they would have been very wide indeed. When the contortions finally stopped, he saw someone who was identical to the intruder they called Sock, albeit this one was almost entirely naked. Socket reached into his backpack, and Ernest thought it was to release Newton, but he was actually retrieving items from a side pocket. He had 2 metallic discs the size of teacup saucers. He placed one on the side of his head and gave the other to his doppelganger, who also attached it to the side of his own head. With help from the others, they were boosted up and into the ventilation tube overhead. With luck, they would trip an alarm and put an end to this folly. But Ernest wasn't hopeful. The exact series of events that led to the doppelganger being killed were initially unclear to him. But Ernest observed the blood running from the many holes one of the gun turrets had created when it fired into the air vents. The original one, Sock, was fine. He screamed something about the disc malfunctioning, and the dampening field had gone offline. It seems that he had already reached the power conduit for the turret near him and had disabled it. But his doppelganger had been too slow, and the other turret managed to get off a short targeted burst before it powered down too. Axel cradled the body of her deceased lover. Crusher would forever now exist in the form of her friend Socket, or at least until his corpse decomposed or was cremated into ash.
Not now, please, not like this.
She said. Blue, retinal lubricant filled Axel's eyes as she rocked back and forth with the body in her arms.
Not like this.
She repeated. She was betraying her normal professional character, and she didn't care. Her love was gone. Gears gently placed a hand on her shoulder.
Come on. We'll have to leave him here for now. We can pick up his body on the way back.
She said. The others agreed, and reluctantly Axel placed Crusher's small frame onto the floor. She gently lowered his head and wiped away her tears.
Okay, let's get this fucking job done.